Okay, so for today, we're going to be continuing with what we did last week, except since today is Friday the 13th, we thought it would be awesome to cover the man, the myth, the legend himself, Chucky. No, I'm just kidding. So we're going to be doing our Friday the 13th pitches, similar to last week, same setup. If the studio came to either of us and said, we want you to use your vision and create the next great Friday the 13th film, what would we do? And similar to last night, I'm going to throw it over to you and you can get us started.
Right. Thank you. So, a little bit of background of me and my experience with the Friday the 13th franchise. I'll just be very honest, straight up. This is not one of my favorite horror franchises. It's not one of my favorite of the classic slasher franchises. I do have very limited experience with this franchise. I'm a big fan of the Platinum Dunes remake. I think I'd say original trilogy is pretty solid, although um, I don't think they're trying to be anything. I don't think the franchise as a whole is trying to be anything more than sort of like a B slasher. So I think it accomplishes that. That's just not necessarily my thing. So I enjoy the original trilogy. I've only seen the first four. Or five. Yes, five. Um, Actually, no, I've seen six. I'm just now realizing that a lot of those movies were kind of forgettable, if I'm being honest. But I tried to watch them all through last year, and I got to six and just kind of was not having it, and just it just wasn't my thing. Not a franchise that I particularly could say that I love, um, but I do genuinely like the remake. I like that original trilogy enough, but other than that, the sequels just kind of got progressively hammier, campier, more B movie. And when that was the direction that it was going, I just sort of decided that I was going to check out. So my pitch is coming from a place of me not being a particular fan of this franchise. So I sort of took what I did like about the movies that in that franchise that I liked to sort of craft this. So starting off with the title, my pitch is entitled Friday the 13th Superstition. So, as you might have remembered from my favorite horror movie and favorite subgenre, favorite subgenre of horror is found footage. So, this is a found footage, sort of urban legend horror film about two friends named Sean and Vic. Very creative name. Who have they have a podcast and a YouTube channel that revolves around investigating urban legends, mysteries, conspiracies. And so we sort of open things up. Remember, this is found footage, so this is them documenting everything on their camera for their channel. We sort of open up to Vic and Sean staking out a supposedly top secret government installation in Maryland. They subsequently climb over a chain link fence, they evade the barbed wire, and they start to hype up to their audience as they talk to the camera about the existence of UFOs and aliens at this base. As they break in and prepare to enter one of the buildings, they get caught and apprehended, and a soldier comes over and turns their camera off. And we kind of zoom out and we see Sean and Vic are editing the video that we just watched in common found footage style, and they're getting ready to post. And then we get a sense of their room, and we see it's decked out with UFOs, conspiracies, cryptid stuff, the whole nine yards. So Vic and Sean decide to start planning their next video. They receive an anonymous email that points them to a really obscure local legend called the Crystal Lake Triangle around Crystal Lake in rural New Jersey, where in just the few square miles around the lake, dozens of hikers and campers have gone missing, more so than the entire other, like outside of that few square miles, more so than anyone outside of there have gone missing. So, dozens of hikers and campers over the years. And it goes back to 1980 when a summer camp at the lake was reopening its doors and all the counselors were found murdered. And it was believed that there was the mother of a young unnamed boy who drowned in the lake in 1957. But local legend asserts that it wasn't the mother. It was the ghost of the boy that drowned that haunts the lake and the woods around it. And it's believed that he wears a hockey mask and wields a machete and will kill trespassers who trespass on his lake. So the duo are kind of surprised that these murders didn't make national headlines, and they start to suspect there might be some sort of local cover up. So the boys decide that they're in for a road trip and they're going to travel to the small town of Crystal Lake, New Jersey. After driving there, they start to interview local townsfolk, Blair Witch Project style, and they start to hear that the legends of Crystal Lake kind of vary. Some say it's the ghost of the boy that drowned, and he wears that hockey mask and wields a machete. Others say he cloth sack on his head with one eye hole, and a pickaxe. Others say he's not a ghost, but a zombie with worms and rotting flesh. But all myths share the same name of the legend, the name of the unnamed boy from the newspapers, Jason Voorhees. So, against many warnings from the locals, Vic and Sean decide to make a trip actually to the lakeside to set up camp and investigate the legend. And they start talking to the audience about this legend that they learned from the townsfolk of Jason and his mother, Pamela Voorhees. So they reach the lake and they start setting up a perimeter with hunting cams and motion activated trail cams and some booby traps and camp out at night. The first night, they don't see much, but they do see something on one of their cameras, something that Sean and Vic both disagree on. Vic thinks it looks like it was just a bear, but Sean thinks it looks like a man that's stalking their campsite. The next night, as they're sort of staking it out, they start to hear some rustles outside. They hear what they think are human-like grunts. They check the cameras to definitively see before, and they see a humanoid figure wearing a hockey mask, wielding a machete, standing right outside their RV, basically sort of making a ruckus. And Vic thinks that it's the townspeople trying to scare them. And ultimately, the figure leaves, which sort of adds credence to his idea that it was just the townspeople trying to scare them. So the next day, the two decide to search around the campsite for evidence of the previous night about who it could have been that was harassing their RV. And they come across a stash of old hiker and camping gear, like a gigantic pile of backpacks and sleeping bags and old tents. Going back to the 1980s, and they find people's IDs and they find wallets and all this stuff just sort of stacked, hidden in the woods. They try to figure out why it's all there, and now both are pretty much on board that there's something fishy going on in Crystal Lake. So Vic and Sean decide to take this to the police, and they approach Crystal Lake PD, the Crystal Lake Sheriff's Office, who at first don't seem to believe them and start to make fun of them for believing, the local gossip, the local urban legends. But then they decide, okay, fine, we'll humor you and we'll go check it out. So they go back to the site where they found all the camping gear, and they find it all gone. The deputy gets kind of flustered and leaves, basically telling them that they need to get out of town if they're going to be, stirring up these old myths and legends, getting the townspeople riled up and trying to pull a prank on these quote unquote, backwoods hillbillies that live out in the woods in this small town. So the two definitely start to come to terms that there is a real conspiracy afoot and it might be infiltrating the local law enforcement. So the two decide to set up sort of a sting operation. They add some hidden trail cams in the area and they get ready to capture the truth on camera as night begins to fall. As they're setting up the cameras though, they're beset upon by Jason Voorhees himself, hockey mask, machete, and all, who knocks them out and takes them to a massive campfire surrounded by cultists in hoods revealing themselves all to be townspeople that we recognize from having been interviewed before, and they're being led by the sheriff and his deputy that had just helped them moments prior. The sheriff reveals that the Crystal Lake community is very secluded, and they like it that way. But tourists keep coming in and ruining the lake and their community with their pollution and their culture. And so Jason is believed to be the reincarnation of a local Native American god, a protector of the lake. The two are sacrificed to Jason, who goes to cut their heads off with his machete, but they escape and they go on the run. And they start evading Jason in the woods as he comes after them. And this is, I imagined, a very perilous sequence of them running for their lives, caught on this found footage, trying to get away from this masked murderer who these townspeople are convinced is the reincarnation of a god. Eventually, they get back to their RV and they try desperately to start it and to drive away. However, they find that their tires are slashed and their brake lines also slashed. And they get attacked by Jason Voorhees, who in this final fight ultimately comes up on top victorious and kills both of them on camera. And after this, drags their bodies. The townspeople take all their stuff and eventually throw their camera into the pile of backpacks and camping gear that's since been moved. And their bodies are what we last see in frame as the battery on the camera starts to die and eventually goes to black. And then, in a final scene, we show two other YouTubers announcing that they will be investigating the disappearance of Sean and Victor in the Crystal Lake Triangle. So a lot shorter than my Halloween pitch, a lot more shorter and sweeter to the point. But there you go, Friday the 13th Superstition.
Interesting. I feel like I have mixed feelings. So I guess my first question would be, and I'm trying to remember from beginning to end, but if you could do a rough estimate on the kill count, how many people died in this?
How many people died on screen would just be Vic and Sean.
Okay, that's what okay, just making sure I didn't like forget somebody from the beginning. Okay. Um, so yeah, this is definitely interesting. So a couple things. So the first thing, and I would like to say a spoiler warning for anybody who may have not played The Quarry. There is many people may have heard about the famous 2015 game Until Dawn created by Supermassive Games. They did a spiritual successor called The Quarry that came out last year. Yeah. Um, and it is about a camp with counselors who uncover the mystery of said camp. And in order to do marketing for it, they actually hired Emily and Murph of College Humor fame, if anybody has ever or was a fan of the classic College Humor, to pretend to be two podcasters who go and investigate about all of the weird stuff happening at the camp. So your setup to this, I just kept thinking of The Quarry because they do this whole I want to say all of the little mini episodes together actually add up to like a 90-minute podcast. And they like go and investigate and see all this weird stuff happening and they get taken and like it's just it was kind of funny that was where not that this did the entire thing, but that's where my brain went. So I just wanted to put that out there. Secondly, I have mixed feelings because this sounds like an awesome movie. I actually think I would really enjoy it. However, and I know you prefaced this at the beginning, I don't know if I would necessarily enjoy this as a Jason movie, if that makes sense. I think I need to see it on screen to fully grasp it, but just kind of like initial first take, I think it sounds like an awesome movie, but I don't know if I would necessarily be all excited about the Jason parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And like you had said that I had pointed out, that's kind of a little bit my point just not being a particular fan of the franchise, and sort of how a lot of those movies are structured and plotted and the tropes of its own franchise. I just wanted to go something totally different that could take that idea but also apply it to something that I do genuinely like or that I do genuinely prefer. So it is very different. And I under the fan base would probably be very upset with this if this actually went out. But if I had to make a Friday the 13th movie, it would have to be something like this, and I'd have to switch it up a little bit to make it something that I guess I would prefer. So
No, that's completely fair. I was gonna wait to do this until I went to do my pitch, but I guess I should say it now. I am the Friday the 13th super fan of the group. I had been begging you to watch these movies for years, but I know that you're not as much of a fan as the campy stuff as I am. Like you said, you stopped at 6. I think that the franchise gets better from 6 on. So,
I
uh,
don't know if this was too much of a hot take. 3 was my favorite of the originals that I saw. 1 through 6. 3 was my favorite. The
no,
reboot would
that's
still
fair.
be my favorite.
I think a lot of people actually like 3. Um, Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, I ranked that one relatively high. Um, it's so interesting to me because, and I think a lot of like super fans would actually agree with this. This is like the one franchise where I feel like a lot of people don't rank the first movie that high. Like it's a classic, don't
Really.
get me wrong, but I think a lot of people put it like when they're ranking, they'll put the original 1980 Friday the 13th pretty low.
Yeah, the original honestly really does not age well. I think a lot of these movies might not age well, but I feel like the original especially is more just like for the renown that it has,
Yeah,
not
it's totally
necessarily
the
anything within itself.
I think that honestly, and this could be a hot take, I think a lot of people just like using the first movie as trivia bait, kind of like at the beginning of Scream when it's like, who was the killer in the first Friday the 13th movie? And everybody says Jason when it was his mom. And I really think that that's why, or I think that that's why the movie itself still kind of holds quote unquote to today, and it has nothing to do with the movie. It's just that it's like one of the greatest pieces of horror trivia.
Yeah, I definitely think that the character of Jason, especially as he's like expounded upon in the sequels, kind of lifts the original up in retrospect because
I
like
agree.
really if there was no, quote unquote Jason Voorhees figure that we know about today, that first like if there were no sequels, that first one would definitely be a very well forgotten, old B or C slasher.
And I think you know this, but for the listeners who don't, when they originally made this movie, it was supposed to only be the first movie. Of course, as many times happens in Hollywood, the studio was like, "Oh, this made a bunch of money. Can you please give us sequels?" And so they decided, remember that kid that pops up at the end? Let's make him the main villain." And then Jason stuck. But the original plan was for this to be a one-off, like so many other '80s slashers.
Right. My favorite piece of trivia about these movies was always how this one was literally made to rip off Halloween,
Yep.
and then Halloween 2 was literally made to rip off Friday the 13th.
Yeah. That's actually yeah.
So you can see the Halloween influence on the first Friday the 13th, and then you can see the Friday the 13th influence on Halloween 2. So that's always been like my favorite little trivia about this movie.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. But yeah, so me being the super fan, kind of like you said, and this was completely prefaced, uh I really think I would like this movie, and I'm sure the first time I watched it, I would be like, I expected more, but then I'd probably rewatch it and really like it and would come to enjoy it. I also wanted to say that I completely agree with you. I think that the 2009 Friday the 13th reboot got so much unnecessary hate, unneeded hate. Like when it first came out, it was just critically panned, and it's awesome. It's a great movie. I think they do great things with Jason. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that aged better with time, so we missed out on a potential sequel. But uh, I really like the reboot. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, just kind of like in summary, I really just wanted to lean into the whole like I think what the idea is there from the original Friday the 13th, and then some of at least the sequels that really take place around the camp, the whole like campfire legend that Jason is sort of like adapting that for the modern day as like an internet urban legend sort of thing was the direction that I was going for, and really playing up the whole mystique and the mystery of him as a figure. You know, who is he? Does he have the hockey mask? Does he have the this? Does he use a pickaxe? Does he use a machete? And also just like not explaining really what he is. Like these townspeople view him as like this protector of the lake, like the reincarnation of a god. And yeah, and it doesn't actually say definitively what he is, if he is supernatural, if he was even that boy that, yeah, I guess in my head I kind of I envisioned like he drowned, but he survived and they took omen or like a symbol and he sort of
Okay.
became like the protector. But it's all head canon. But out of the story, that would be my head canon. That's not explicit in the story.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
actually think that that's one of the best parts is that you don't over-explain it, so it would allow for the fans to kind of do with it as they please, and I think that's a good thing in movies where like the less is more approach.
And I feel like with Jason especially, and somewhat with Michael, like last week, some of these characters, they're the best when you deconstruct them the least.
Yeah, and I like that I took the urban legend approach with Myers, and then you took the urban legend approach with Jason. I think there's something there to be said. I'm not sure what it is, but I like
I
it.
mean, unashamedly, I just love like urban legend type stories, like movies about like these campfire stories, whether they're real or not, and things from the past, legends from the past becoming reality in the future. Like any horror movie that deals with that, I'm always game.
And I don't mean to take us too far off course here, but I still remember when we first met and you were telling about all those like urban legend game things that you could play to like talk to ghosts and stuff. And I was like, I don't believe you, but I don't want to find out if you're right. So don't go playing those games.
Oh yeah, the creepy pasta rituals.
Yes, that's
Yeah, everyone look up solo hide and seek. That's your homework, or the man in the fields, or the elevator game and such. The bowl game too. Anyway, that's my
if you
plugging.
play them, we are not liable for what
E-
happens.
Exactly. So anyway, Friday the
Um,
13th superstition, everyone.
did you say who you would have directing?
I actually did not for this. I didn't have a strong person in mind.
Okay.
Found footage is just one of those things that's just like I feel like a very particular like you can't bring in like a big studio director to successfully pull off a found footage film. I feel like most in my experience a lot of horror directors now sort of either get their start in found footage or like student films that are found footage. So I think in general, I would want it to be someone sort of like that, maybe like fresh out of film school, someone trying to make it, someone who's made like short films that hasn't actually made like a big studio film, make this like the entrance.
That's fair. Um, Okay. Well, you know, I would just want to end with, as I've sat here and had more time to think about it, I actually do think I really like your pitch. Um,
Yeah.
I will say, and this is totally just because of my brain, when you said they think that he's this protector, I was really curious if you were going to have Jason show up and then murder all the townspeople.
That would be an interesting twist. Yeah, like they think he's like a protector of the town and then he just really isn't and just doesn't care. No, I never considered that angle, but that'd be an interesting twist.
That would probably be the only thing that I would have wished would have happened, but otherwise, I really do like the movie now that I've had some more time to think about it. I think I was too focused on what I expected as opposed to what I actually got.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, especially from the designated Friday the 13th fan.
If anybody's curious, I can name every single actor who's ever played Jason Voorhees. Obviously, doing it on a podcast means nothing because, as far as they know, I could just have it pulled up on the screen. But if we ever meet in person, I can do it for you. That's how much of a super fan I am.
Very good.
um, so, moving into my pitch, uh, I'm also doing a Friday the 13th. Well, I guess, was yours more of a reboot or just a straight up remake? Or I guess it's more of a reimagining.
A reimagining reboot. It definitely not a remake
Okay,
because
yeah.
it doesn't follow the same beats. But either reboot or reimagining, to me, they're kind of one and the same. But yeah, completely new continuity, completely new lore.
Okay.
Lots of
So
callbacks, but like a very much a new thing.
okay. So mine is much more of a classic idea of a reboot. Sticking with the theme from last week, mine is titled Voorhees. As you will find out with all of these pitches, I really like using the names. To me, that's just really cool when they do that in titles. And if you're curious as to why I didn't use the first names, it's because there's already a movie called Michael and there's already a movie called Jason. And so I didn't want confusion. And they've got last names. The last names are very recognizable. So I just went with the last names. So this one is Voorhees, and it is directed by Dave Franco. So I know what you're thinking. The actor who everybody thinks is hot. Well, in 2020, I believe is when it was, he had his directorial debut where he both wrote and directed a movie called The Rental. It was starring his wife, Alison Brie, as well as Dan Stevens, who we have raved about on this show before, or on this podcast, excuse me, specifically for the 2014 movie The Guest. And this is a horror movie, and I don't know, like, I don't really remember if a lot of people like this movie. I know it was really hyped when it was coming out because it was Dave Franco doing it, but I never really followed what happened after the fact. I loved it. I really enjoy it, and I enjoyed it so much that, especially with the style of movie I'm making, I would want to bring Dave Franco back away from acting to direct this movie. I think it would be perfect. It's kind of in the same style of The Rental, so I think he would do a really good job at doing it. So, ironically, I also made my movie found footage. For a really long time, we have discussed about this for ages, but for the people at home, I personally think that, generally speaking, of all of the classic slashers, I think that Jason lends himself perfectly to found footage. I think that if they were to do the reboot, whenever they do another Friday the 13th movie, if they went with found footage, I think it would be an amazing an amazing choice. And so that's what I did. This is an idea that I've had for a while. This is like a pitch that's kind of like my go-to when people are like, hey, if you were to bring it back, what would you do? So essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the general gist of the actual story, and then there are some scenes that I've already thought through that I have perfectly played out. So we start the movie, and there's a bunch of construction workers. Now, it's on a construction site. There's like a building that's like half built, but by half built, they've kind of just built the base of the structure. Like, you can tell it is a building being built, but it's not like it's almost done or anything like that. There's some construction equipment. There's like a big hole, like they're doing their job, but it's at night. This is the night crew. It's kind of short staffed as they're doing stuff. And essentially, slowly, one by one, we start seeing people get murdered. In my head, it's probably like 4 people, but those are semantics. We can have like 8 people get murdered if the budget affords for it. That's another thing that I would like to I guess I should have prefaced. So, in my personal opinion, the best Jason is the Jason who is the absolute brutal killing machine. And so this movie is going to have a very high body count. That a lot of the Friday the 13th movies have very high body counts until the most recent trilogy. Jason held the record for the most kills of any slasher villain, and so I want to kind of stick to that. So a lot of murders. And going back to the construction site, it's very like you can't see anything. This isn't where there's going to be like the reveal or anything like that, but you're just seeing all of these people just get brutally murdered. You're gonna see the machete. You're gonna know that a guy is doing it, but I'm waiting to do the reveal until later. Like, this is all supposed to be very stylistic, and so there's all of these different murders, and then we're gonna get the title card. Then we're gonna open on a finished house. It is this beautiful lake house. It is on premium property. My exact note is, it's big, but not quite a mansion. Think the house that was in the movie Smile, the horror movie, with a second level, but not as big as the house in The Purge. So that was how I kind of wanted you to get an idea. Like, it's a relatively medium-sized style lake house. And essentially, we are going to cut to these. There's a guy who he's pulling up with his family. This is his lake house. There's a husband. There's a wife. Then there is a oldest son who is in college with a girlfriend. There is a high school aged middle daughter who has come with her best friend. And then there is a youngest son who is in middle school. So that's like kind of the setup for this. And essentially, like I said, this is going to be found footage. So from this point on, everything is going to be shown through the security cameras of this lake house. So there's pool cameras, or I guess I shouldn't say pool cameras, sorry. There's lake cameras, like we're going to be able to see stuff from the back of the house. It's not a big walk to get to the lake, so it's going to be far away. I really want there to be a lot of shots where it's like was Jason there or was he not there? Was he watching these people or was he not watching these people? There will be some shots that will be very blatant. In my mind, I have a perfect idea for a shot where this is a nice, modern, stylistic lake house. So, of course, where some places might have walls, this place would have those open window wall things that's very common in the modern house design. And I want there to be a spot where Jason is just standing there watching you through the window, and somebody is moving around. Maybe it's at night. Maybe they're getting like a bowl of cereal, or they were just hungry. They wanted a glass of milk. They couldn't sleep, whatever it may be. And this person has no idea that Jason is standing there watching them. But we know, because we see it on the camera, we'll utilize night vision, stuff like that. So I from this point forward, from that like initial cut, it's all found footage. And this is the part where I'm kind of done with the specific scenes. I'm now just going to tell you what the actual story is, and then you can tell me if you like it. So, a wealthy businessman purchases Camp Crystal Lake. He then tears down all of the cabins so that way he can build this beautiful lakefront property. Now, obviously, that's not a good idea. Essentially, what ends up happening is, through the course of the movie, through the course of so this is another thing I should say. I think it's better for me personally in found footage films or actually I shouldn't even say in found footage films, in horror films in general. I really enjoy when instead of the survivors slowly realizing stuff is happening, that they kind of get more scared until eventually it's revealed. I really like when slowly stuff is happening, but they just kind of think it's in their head. And, like maybe they think they've misplaced their phone and then something comes up so they forget about it. Like that kind of stuff. So in my mind, this family is so focused on having this fun weekend. Everybody has a dynamic that they're like going to kind of lose focus or not really put two and two together. But if they had just stopped for a second and really actually took in the vacation, because similar to last week, this kind of has a theme, and the theme is kind of going to be around that. So they're so focused on on the world itself that if they had just stopped and like thought it out, or just took a second to breathe, that they would have noticed these things. They could have saved themselves. And then the other part is the reveal. So over the course of the movie, I didn't think through what I wanted to be, but there would be some sort of conflict. We'd get to know the characters. I do want you to kind of feel for them. Whether you feel good or bad is up to you. But essentially, we find out that the main businessman, he covered up all of the murders. And Jason had been murdering all of his construction crew. But he completely ignored the warning and continued to make this building. So he was just like, I don't care. This is amazing property. I'm building it. I'll just deal with it later. Like he just and I know what you might be thinking. Well, if like 20 people got murdered by a person, you would, do something about it. In my mind, I kind of have this idea that he's like a C-suite level businessman who was attempting to hear details from the construction people, but he didn't really listen to what the guy was saying. He was just like, I don't care. Get it done. I want my building, like that kind of thing, where he just was completely oblivious, sticking with the theme. And so we find out that a camp counselor was attacked and thrown into the water at Camp Crystal Lake. They couldn't swim and they drowned. That week, every other counselor was murdered at the camp. So the camp was shut down, never to open again. That's like the history of Camp Crystal Lake. The killer was never found. I envision the kids are going to be finding this out. And that's kind of like the backstory. You know, you're thinking it's just the basic 1980 Friday the 13th story. So now you're thinking it's a requel. But the twist is that Pamela is actually the one who drowned. The mother was a camp counselor. She was doing her due. Then she got attacked, thrown in the water. The other counselors were just being a-holes. She couldn't swim. She drowned. And Jason decided, you can't kill my mama and not have consequences. So he murdered everybody. Completely gruesome. Like there was no final girl. There was nothing. He blamed the entire camp. He murdered everybody. He then escaped into the woods and continued to live off the land for years. So that's another key thing. He was a kid. Now, in order for it to be like the kid who murdered everybody, I'm going to say he's late elementary school, middle school kind of. Like I don't want him to be a high schooler. Like I still want him to be a kid because it's a kid who did it. But obviously you're not going to think that like a 6-year-old could do it. So, you know, take that as you will. The point is, through his formative years, he was raised in the wilderness. So he's essentially like this Tarzan-esque style wildebeest. So that's another thing that develops his character. And so he's a master hunter. He's a master woodsman. He can survive in the craziest of climates. And there have also been other instances over the years where people have gone missing near the campsite. But everybody thinks it's an urban legend, kind of like the Sasquatch. Haha, it ties into yours. Surprise. And so this was just all stuff that the businessman knew, but he completely ignored it. He was like, oh, it's just stuff people made up because they didn't want you to have this land. See how beautiful this land is? Like he did not heed a single warning. His wife is pissed. And so that's the kind of the key takeaway. If the businessman had just taken a second to be like, oh my God, maybe I should look into the fact that like 80 people have died here. By the way, when all of these things are being found out, there will be flashbacks, there will be cutaways. That's where a lot of the murdering comes from. And the key takeaway is, or the way it ends is, pretty much everybody gets murdered. So the wife gets murdered, the husband gets murdered, the oldest couple gets murdered, the middle girl and the daughter get murdered, and her best friend get murdered. The only person who lives is the youngest child, who is the one who ends up killing Jason. And surprise, surprise, his name is Tommy Jarvis. That's like my one ode to the originals. That's like the one Easter egg. I imagine I would sprinkle some other stuff throughout, but it doesn't have to be Tommy Jarvis. His name can just be Tommy. But I did want that to be like the one little nod to the original, that the youngest kid is the one who takes him out, Corey style, and that's like it's just the reason why is because then I want it to be similar imagery to what happened with Jason. So now we have this middle school child who is the same age as Jason, who's now left to fend for himself, who's going to have to learn in his formative years with all of this trauma. And it's kind of like how they connected to each other in that way. And so I apologize for not going in depth with necessarily a lot of the kills. I imagine it'll be very as you would expect in a found footage film. There's going to be some fun jump scares. There's going to be some cool murders. Of course, my entire budget's going to go to the special effects to make sure they're as cool as possible. There will be no there will be no blood drop expense that is not used. And so the kills will be cool, but everybody dies except for little middle school Tommy, who is then left to age as Jason did when he was left motherless and in the woods. That's Voorhees.
quick clarification. So, are you trying to imply that Tommy becomes like the new Jason?
So I want to leave it open because,
Okay.
in theory, this is now like a home. The businessman went there. There should be people who come looking for him when he doesn't return to work. Like, you'd think that someone would care. The question is, when they get there, is Tommy there? Is he in the woods? Did Tommy go out looking for help and get found by emergency services? We don't know. You're not going to know. I really just kind of wanted to go black as it kind of sets in that Tommy is now in this instance that Jason was in. When Jason had his choice, he ran into the woods. What will Tommy do? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely dig that angle. Of course, I'm a huge fan of the found footage aspect and the whole urban legend aspect, um, both which very good touches. Um, Obviously coming from mine as well. Um, yeah, no, I like the, it really, I think we're sort of on the same wavelength in terms of what we were kind of looking for in adjacent to some degree.
Yeah.
I think yours definitely leans into the whole slasher aspect and has a significantly higher kill count than mine did. But yeah, like we both sort of leaned into that idea of him as the urban legend, him as the mythical figure sort of that the businessman ignores, and sort of like the aspect that I've always appreciated about the character as well, with him being like the guardian of the lake, and then here with him sort of residing around Camp Crystal Lake, the grounds of it, and then not wanting to sort of part with it when this new construction comes in. um, but just that idea of like his territoriality, I guess is the word.
Mhm.
Um, Sort of like he's sort of like a Leatherface in that aspect, where whereas Michael is like, uh, he's silent, but he's still like intelligent. He's still like looking and he's calculating and he's thinking. I feel like with Jason and like someone like Leatherface, they're mentally deficient. They're typically abused by the people that are around and being used by them. In this case, like the ghost of his dead mom, pretty much. But just that sort of like primal instinct of territoriality and protectiveness over Camp Crystal Lake as like his domain. I've always appreciated that aspect of the character, and I think that you bring that into this pitch really well.
Thank you.
Um,
And I agree.
yeah, and of course, knowing you, I'm sure the kills would in fact be pretty wicked.
Yes, for the audience who does not know me personally, that is my piece de resistance, or I tend to consider myself a little bit of a visionary. I do enjoy a good kill here or there, and I like the idea of being able to craft the cinematography and the stylized way that we can look at the different murders. Yeah, it should look fun on the big screen.
And so, just to be clear, you're going with the fully human Jason, right? I just wanted to make sure I got all that right.
I am going with a fully human Jason.
That's what
In
I like anyway.
Yeah, in 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 my personal opinion, uh, I think that this should just be a one-off. Like we talked about before, the studio will just be like, "Hey, I want to throw money at it," and if I say no, in theory, they're just going to get somebody else. So, take that as you will. But for the purposes of this, he is fully human, and he's just like a sub-primal human who's been living in the forest. 'Cause I say Tarzan-esque because I know that's the one everybody goes to, but of course Tarzan got to talk to animals and all that jazz. Jason wasn't doing that, so that's why he's become this sort of wildebeest type human.
Right. That's really what I appreciate from especially the reboot, is the whole like he's just a man who just has lived in these woods, and like he's got those tunnels that are like decked out with like makeshift furniture and little tools that he's made and things and trinkets that he's made, like things like that, where that's what I've always liked, and that's what I like about that original trilogy of movies, is he's like fully human. I guess some in the um final chapter it starts to get a little vague about whether he's supernatural or just human, and then obviously he's not even in 5, spoiler alert, and then in 6,
Frickin'
he's like
Burns.
full on zombie mode, like Cenobite, uh, not Cenobite, Deadite level, just
Yeah.
being like brought back. So yeah,
The
that's what
age
I like
old
about the first 3.
I was just gonna say the age old is Jason secretly a Deadite? Is that how he's connected to Evil Dead? We'll never know.
Yeah, because there's like a Necromonicon and like one of like Jason Goes to Hell, right, or something like that.
Yeah, so just a little bit of history once again for the viewers. I think you already know this. Freddy vs. Jason was a massive hit, but unfortunately, it took 12 years to get to the big screen. By the time it came in 2003, there was so much working against it. Of course, it did amazing at the box office. Everybody was so excited. And the studio wanted a sequel, but like I said, there was so much working against it, so that the sequel was supposed to be Freddy versus Jason versus Ash. And they were going to bring Ash Williams. They were going to do a whole Evil Dead tie-in, and everybody, if I'm not mistaken, the only person on board was actually Bruce Campbell. Like everybody from the Nightmare side was done. Robert Englund had said he was going to retire after 2003. They didn't. Ken Kersinger wasn't on board. Like the 12 years had just made everybody so ready to be done with the project that there was this all of the outside forces were working against it. But they did end up making it into a comic. The comic's really good. I do recommend it. I won't do any spoilers, but essentially they end up playing out what would have happened in the movie because they did make a script in the comics, and that it does tie a lot in with Evil Dead. They do a really good job of taking things from the different movies that when we watched didn't mean anything, but now they do. It's like, oh, I can see how this makes sense, and so yeah, I do recommend those comics if anybody's curious.
Yeah, and I definitely need to check out Freddy versus Jason. That's like the one. I'm sure at some point, just as because I'm a completionist and sometimes I get neurotic about being a completionist, that I'll probably just watch the rest of the franchise. Not this spooky season, maybe next or the one after that, who knows? But the one that I definitely want to check out is Freddy versus Jason. I had not have not seen that one. Yeah, because out of the other big 3, the other 2 of the big 3, I've seen them all the way through the Halloweens and all the all the Nightmare on Elm Streets. This is like the only one that's lacking of the big 3. So I'm sure at some point I'll finish it off. But yeah.
You're not. I can already tell you right now, just because I know you don't really like the campy stuff. I don't think you're gonna like it. Um, the To me, it holds a special place in my heart. I really enjoy the movie. I think that it does all of the so once again, just a little bit of background for people. The movie went through so many different rewrites. There we could actually do a whole podcast dissecting all of the different scripts that were made. I have a whole book about it. It has all the scripts in it. It's really cool. But by the time they got to this movie, what we ended up getting wasn't bad. I thoroughly enjoy it. However, a lot of people were kind of like looking back on it in hindsight. Is this really a good movie? I don't know. Was casting a director who's famous for martial arts films a good idea? Also, this was around the turn of the century, so of course, there's a lot of use of CGI. Um, it's not the greatest CGI, so I don't know how much you're going to like it. I know you really love Freddy, and I do think that Robert Englund gives a really good performance. So if you don't like a lot of the characters, at the very least, I'm hoping you like Freddy. I think even for me, the best parts are Jason and Freddy. Like I totally understand when people are like, "Oh, the characters are dull, the story's terrible," but like we're all there to see Freddy fight Jason. It happens. It's epic. So take that as you will.
Yeah, the main thing that was keeping me also from finishing the franchise was just for some reason, I don't know if it's rights issues or what, but only the first 8 movies are on the standard Blu-ray box set or
Hmm.
like collection. And then Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X both never made it to Blu-ray in the US. Um, but there was that new Scream Factory complete set that was like really nice and cool, but it was like $200. So I was like, I'm not gonna do that. I'd do that for just a franchise I'm not particularly passionate about, and B, just for those last 2 movies, basically. So that was one thing that was keeping me from it. It's a weird place. Those movies are like almost lost, like Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, because they weren't available on Blu-ray. The DVDs were all out of print, very hard to come by, and going for like really high price gouged prices on like eBay and whatnot. And then for a while, like neither of them were on streaming. So like they were kind of just like lost media for a little bit. But
Hmm.
obviously there's that Scream Factory set. So if you're a huge Friday the 13th fan, it might be worth it. I know the prices have gone down a lot. So
It's definitely, I lucked out. I managed to get all of them for a really, really good price because I went to McKay's. And
there you go. That's
that
the
was the
place.
first thing I ever bought there.
That's the place.
Um, yeah, I once again, this can be a discussion for another time, but everybody hates Jason X, and I just love it. I understand why
It
everybody hates it, but it's just awesome because it does everything that I want to watch. It's kind of like we were talking about with like the I don't want to say stupid, that's not the right word, but like the campy 80s action movies, like, with Commando. Arnold Schwarzenegger stands in the middle of a field and people shoot thousands of bullets at him and he doesn't get hit, but he looks epic shooting back at people, hitting every single bullet. You're not watching for the story, you're watching for the experience.
took me a long time to put together that it was called Jason X because it was the 10th movie.
Like-
I just thought that was like a future because I knew it was like a futuristic one, and I just thought like Jason X was just like I don't know, like making it sound all like sci-fi and futuristic-y. And then it took me a long time to realize, oh, it's a Roman numeral 10. That makes sense.
So did you think Saw X was in the future? No, I'm just kidding.
Because yeah, John Kramer didn't die. He's deep frozen in space.
That'd be epic if he just came out as like a cyborg and we got Cyborg Billy. But no, I don't think the Saw franchise would ever do that.
Fortunately.
Uh,
Or fortunate.
so one more thing that I wanted to cover before we wrapped up this podcast is, uh, I know you know, but for people who don't know, we are getting a new TV show called Camp Crystal Lake, and it is actually, I apologize. I believe at the moment it's just called Crystal Lake. And we don't know a lot about it yet, but we do know some things. So I'm just kind of going to fill you and the listeners in on a couple details. And then I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts on it. So the first thing and the most important thing to note is when this was originally announced, it was being done by Victor Miller. So a little bit of background. Since 2016, we have had this gigantic rights battle between Sean S. Cunningham, who was the director of the first and producer technically of the first Friday the 13th film in 1980. Victor Miller is who wrote the script. And because of the rights laws, we have been in the age of all of the people who were the script writers saying, I want my rights back. It happened with Clive Barker, with Hellraiser, and some other people. And the first major one was Friday the 13th. This battle took about 5 years. It was a little over. And then they finally came to an agreement. And the way it works is Victor Miller was given the rights to everything that has to do with Friday the 13th, the first movie, 1980. So that's Kid Jason, that's Camp Crystal Lake, and anything done in that first movie. From the second movie on, Sean S. Cunningham has all the rights. So the key things are adult Jason, the hockey mask, the thing that we know and love. So when they originally, there's some more semantics to how the rights were distributed, but that's the key thing to know for this. So when Crystal Lake was first announced and they said Victor Miller was doing it, they announced it as a prequel to the 1980 movie. And so we're thinking, okay, that makes sense. They're going to have Kid Jason. We're going to see some stuff. They're probably going to, maybe they'll do a TV show that plays out what happened with that fateful event. And so it all just kind of made sense. And then things developed from there. And what ended up coming out is the producers and the creators said, hey, we just want to let y'all know that through some gracious benefactors, they wouldn't say it, but we all know it has to be Sean S. Cunningham, they were actually able to get all of the rights in order to do whatever the heck they want with Crystal Lake. So Sean S. Cunningham's name's not on this. He hates Victor Miller at this point. He is spiting him. And so whether I'm sure he's getting paid behind the scenes, but he does not want to have anything to do with this guy. That's why his name's not going to be on it. And so, but the key takeaway is the A24, Peacock, all the people involved, they have the ability to do whatever they want with Crystal Lake. So, with that being said, it is being penned by Brian Fuller, who is most famously known for doing the Hannibal TV show, which I never personally watched, but I know a lot of people absolutely love that show. He also wrote a little bit for American Gods. Most recently, it looks like he's done every episode of Star Trek Discovery. So that's interesting if you happen to watch that show. And the only other thing we know as far as like crew relation is that Adrienne King, the actress who plays Alice Hardy in the original movie, she is returning to not play Alice Hardy because it's going to start as a prequel, but presumably she will be an older character. It'd be really weird if they made her Pamela, but who knows? We don't know who she's playing, but it's cool that she's returning. And then the other thing that we know that is interesting to keep in mind is the creators have a vision. They would like to have this show last 10 plus seasons, and they would like for it to just start in the earliest days and then slowly advance and continue to advance each season. And they want to tell multiple stories about the different ages of Jason. And to me, of course, this wasn't specified, but to me, it almost sounds like they'd like to recreate all of the plots of the different movies just in their own way in TV show form. But they were very specific that once they were actually originally it was going to be a prequel and it was just going to take place at the camp and tell stuff we kind of could have assumed. But now that the world's their oyster, they're like, we're going to do season 1. It's going to be good, and then this thing ain't stopping. And so we're going to get adult Jason at some point, which I think is really cool. That was my biggest worry when they first announced this. Obviously Kid Jason is cool, but like a lot of people have been waiting, I guess, since 2009. I know the video game came out in 2015, but because of the rights issues, it ended up dying. And so, maybe you played the game, but generally speaking, it's been a long time since we've had Jason. So this is really cool. Of course, it'll still be a couple years until we get adult Jason, unless they do like a gigantic time jump, which I wouldn't recommend. I actually think it would be cool, of course, if they do the stories well, to actually like show different ages of Jason with like key events, kind of like we were talking about, with Michael. He's the embodiment of evil. You kind of wonder if it's okay to show his background. Some people may like seeing how he develops. Some people may prefer if it's a complete enigma. With Jason, however, there is more room for story. And very specifically, the one other thing I'd like to say before throwing it over to you is that the one thing that has never been explored ever is Jason's father. And before the rights issues, they were actually working on a movie that was going to finally show us Mr. Voorhees. Of course, that never came to be. And so I think it'd be really cool if we met Jason's dad. I don't know if they are going to have him be abusive. I don't know if he'd be a good father. That's up to them. I don't necessarily think there's a good or bad way to go with it, but I actually think it'd be a very great opportunity to finally introduce Papa Jason and allow us to kind of see that dynamic. So I know that was a lot, but with everything that I said, what are your thoughts?
I think with A24 potentially poaching the rights to Halloween, that obviously Jason's dad is Corey Cunningham. They even got the last name. So, no, I mean, yeah, I'm very intrigued. Just because, for one, A24 is known for elevated horror, for very highbrow, artistic, intellectual sort of sides of not just horror, but movies in general. And they're adapting what is known, and even you as a fan, I think you can attest to this, what's known for being like the schlocky, cheesy, campy B movie slasher. It just seems like the complete opposite of what they would do, but the fact that they're doing it makes me just all the more intrigued. Um, I do think it is very interesting to especially take that prequel route. I'm sure that first season will be very strong and start off on a good foot because I think that's a very interesting area to explore. Maybe they could delve into a little bit like a Bates Motel with sort of weird thing with his mom sort of going on psychologically and whatnot. And like you said, exploring his dad and his father, I'm sure there's some very interesting lore that they could incorporate there and do some cool things with. And maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll find out more about the accident where he drowned or didn't drown. And, maybe it wasn't as clear cut as it seems because as we've covered, Jason's a character that's kind of shrouded in myth and mystery. So maybe the legends that were told weren't quite right because we've never actually seen what happened back in 1957, I guess, from the perspective of the first movie. So yeah, I am very intrigued, tentatively optimistic. I'm not a particular fan of A24 horror. It's very hit or miss. Some of their movies I really love, some of their horror movies I really don't like. So just the fact that they're adapting this thing that they normally wouldn't just gets me very interested. The question I want to pose to you, um, would you prefer that they stayed loyal to the timeline in terms of his accident happens in 1957, the events of him as an adult take place in the 80s, or would you want them to do so it chapter 2 treatment where they age it up to the modern day? Where like maybe the accident happens in the 80s and then when he's an adult it's in the present.
So before I answer that question, because this does apply, I was looking for Brian Fuller's exact quote so that way I could provide some context. He calls the series a pre-remake quel, which is a new term. Of course, we have requels and legacy quels, but now we're getting a pre-remake quel. And he also said in the same interview that we can go to hell, we can go to space. That's not to say that we will do those things, but if we go 10 seasons, I will be lobbying very hard to go to space, which is kind of where I was coming from with it would be hilarious if he redid Jason X just because everybody hates that movie. It's not as hated as 9. I think most people agree 9's the worst movie. Actually, I'm sorry. Some people are really pissed off at 5 for what they did with Roy Burns. Anyway, to answer your question, I would not like if it was an It Part 1, It Part 2 thing, just because if you age them too quickly, I think you would be missing out on stories to be told. Now, don't get me wrong. This could only go 3 seasons, in which case, cool. You should age him. Get there as quickly as possible. But if you really think that you can write a good show and you can make this go for 10 seasons, I would just advise not to rush it. Once again, it's got to be a good story. So if we do Kid Jason and you want to do another thing where he's 2 years older or whatever it is, it has to be a good story. So, I don't want them to do it just to do it. But I think if they age Jason too quickly, that they would be missing out on potential.
Right. But what I meant more so was just like the actual like setting, like the time. Like how in the original movie he drowns in 1957 and
Oh,
then the
my
original
apologies.
movie takes place in 1980. Would you like to see that where like this whole first season it takes place in the 50s when he's
Yeah,
young, or would you
they
like
already
them
said
to
it
like
takes place in the 50s. My apologies for not saying that.
right. They did say that?
Yeah, they said it's going to take place in the 50s, which is,
Okay.
excuse me, which is why everybody thinks it's going to, explore the events of what happened leading up to Jason's unlikely demise.
That's what I was making the reference to it for, was just like how in the books it's the 60s and then the 80s, and then when they made these new movies they aged it up where when they're kids it's the 80s and then when they're adults it's 2000, whatever, 17.
I follow. My apologies for misunderstanding that question. If as it stands right now, they said they're going to be in the 50s, so presumably they would, I think personally, because of what Stranger Things has done, I know that the 80s craze has kind of passed, but if Stranger Things season 4 was said anything, I think that that still exists. So I have a feeling they're gonna purposefully try and capitalize on the nostalgia. They're gonna have fun with the 50s. They're gonna have fun with the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever it is. So I personally think that they're gonna try and capitalize on the nostalgia, kind of like Stranger Things did.
Makes sense. So overall, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I think this is supposed to premiere next year, right?
Yeah,
I
so
thought it was
I know it got
2024.
halted because of the strikes. So I guess
Okay, so maybe late next year or early 2025. Either way, I'm looking forward to it.
let's see here. They posted a screenshot of them finally all getting together to start writing the script in March. So they
Okay.
just started writing March 25th, 2023.
Maybe fall of next year, depending on how long the season is, but we shall see.
Yeah,
I'm
ju-
looking forward to it.
just out of curiosity, and I guess our viewers may want to know as well. Are there any updates on the strike?
The writer's strike has ended. The
Okay.
Screen Actors Guild strike is still going as of this recording.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. So in theory, they could be writing the script, and then when the actor stuff is done, then they can start filming. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank y'all for listening.